Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly webinar. I am James Tippett with Workplace AI and have the pleasure of introducing Brad Federman, our guest for this morning. Brad, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Brad is joining us from the Memphis, Tennessee area, and let me just tell you a little bit about him. Brad is on a mission to inspire possibilities. Every day, countless people struggle in workplaces that fail to live up to their promises and values. Brad has dedicated his career to changing that narrative, helping organizations create cultures where employees and customers thrive. Brad is the founder and CEO of Performance Point and partners with industry leaders like Nordstrom, FedEx, and the Mayo Clinic to build successful cultures, to lift up leadership, to build resilient teams, foster engagement, and drive the customer experience. He has over 25 years of experience as an international author, speaker, and consultant. and really is passionate about helping organizations discover and live their possible. So excited to have you with us today, Brad. Thank you.
Excited to be here. It's always the most embarrassing moment of an interview is the introduction and having to sit through people talking about you. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
And not look too or try to look humble as we talk about all of your accomplishments. Well,
Exactly.
I have loved getting to know you and getting to know Performance Point, and thank you again for joining us this morning to talk about company culture. What an important topic.
Yeah. No, I think it is one of the most key things going on right now. It's a competitive differentiator that will only become more important as we progress in the future. I can't stress culture is it's a difference maker for a company.
Well, and let's get into it. So let's talk a little bit about your definition for culture. What, we've got this term, and a lot of people think they know what it means, but let's hear from you. What is company culture?
Well, I'll give you a generic neutral definition that we use for culture that we like, and it's simply a shared way of doing things. And the reason we use that definition is because people think of culture as your values or your behaviors. We think of it as values and behaviors, but it's also about your systems and processes and everything that you've put together as a company. The truth is the way you recruit, hire, onboard, um, manage performance, do succession planning, even the way you have people exit your company, um, and the way you work with your customers, the way you bring them on and you meet them and you work with them and service them. All of those things, all those systems should should support your culture. And so it's really not just about values and behaviors. It's about values and behaviors that are um, that are supported and backed up by an entire system that promotes who you are in a way that drives your business forward. That's really what culture is.
And everything you just talked about there, Brad, gives us a ton of different things that we can unpack this morning. Everything from bringing an employee on to how they work to how they leave to bringing your customers on and how you work with them and then how they leave. There's a lot to unpack in that.
Yes,
So
yes.
you talked a little bit about this, and I'd like to kind of front load with it. What does culture have to do with a company's success?
Wow. Well, I think a couple of things. One is if you look at today's environment, so much change has occurred. People look at COVID and they think COVID changed the world. COVID sped a lot of things up. I don't know that it changed the world. I think it just increased it sped up the changes that were already existing. And those changes are reflective of two things. One is for years, employees have had a desire to have a different workplace that reflected them as much as the business. And with the labor shortages that we've had over the recent years, that's allowed them to have some influence, right? The
There's been
second
some,
thing is you've
yeah,
got technology that is now geared towards networks and connections, not towards hierarchy. And you have massive diversity in the workplace as well. And the combination of that plus change happening at a faster rate, um, it creates a challenge for organizations. It feels for most employees when they address change so quickly and so fast and so often, it feels like people are getting whiplash. And when you rely on a hierarchy to do that, it becomes a bottleneck. So you get whiplash and you're not getting the progress you need, right? And then when you have lots of diversity in the workplace, generational diversity, et cetera, all rules have left the building, right? Because everybody comes at life differently. I'll give you a couple of just fun examples that are not um, they're not necessarily work related. I have opened up the door for one woman and been thanked. I've opened up a door for another woman and been called a male chauvinist pig. The same act, two different people react to it very, very differently, right? And so
right.
you have that same thing happening in the workplace. And by the way, just so everybody knows, I open the door for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a male or female. I do it for everybody. But the reality is we lack rules. Culture creates the rules of the road. Culture creates an efficient and an effective way to get things done in terms of the way we make decisions and then we work together. And that it's like putting oil in your car. It allows your car to run. And it's the same thing for organizations. I would also argue that if you set your culture up the right way, it fosters growth for your business. So what do I mean by that? Most organizations set up culture around an individual leader or a C-suite of people, or they actually ask their employees, what do you think our culture should be? The truth is, every business exists for a reason. Every business has a purpose. Every business has a brand promise that they make to their customers. Your culture should reflect why you exist, what your purpose is. It should reflect the way that your brand promise comes true. Brand promises don't determine customer loyalty. Culture does, because culture is your brand promise in action, right? And the best example I can give you right now would be, okay, you've eaten fast food, right?
Yes.
Okay. Have you eaten in
More than
Burger King?
once even.
More than once. So you don't want to admit this, James, do you? Have you eaten in Burger King?
I have
And you've eaten in Chick-fil-A, right?
both, yes.
Okay, good. Which do you prefer, by the way?
Chick-fil-A.
All right. That doesn't surprise me. Chick-fil-A, its business is booming. Burger King's business is not. Now they both have branding, they both have marketing. They both focus on uh, um, the promise they give to their customers. The difference is this: Chick-fil-A backs its promise up with systems, the way they hire, who they hire, training, etc. So when you walk into a Chick-fil-A, you experience service, you experience the kindness and the other attributes and values that company says they stand for, right? When you walk
Definitely.
into Burger
Yes.
King, you're told you rule. But when you ask for a custom sandwich, it doesn't usually come back to you correctly. And even if you ask for a custom sandwich, in many cases, it's on things like stale bread. And so the truth is that it's a hollow promise. And the only way Burger King can compete is they're going to have to change, not you rule, they have to change the fact that they're not living up to their branding and their promise to their customers. And so it's more than marketing. People think of brands as marketing, but your culture is truly your ultimate branding exercise.
So that actually can be a huge betrayal then, Brad, if your marketing doesn't match your culture. If you say you're the king and then you get treated like, the servant instead of the king, then there's some betrayal there that people are going to recognize.
100%. And that's why I always tell people building cultures in terms of defining it, designing it, is an outside to inside job. Okay. You look at why you exist and who you serve as the starting point for building your culture. And then you bring it internally and you work with your employees to make that come true in not only a meaningful way for the customers, but in a meaningful, fulfilling way for your employees. So they live it and they want to live it. So it does represent your employees, but you don't start there. You start outside and you work in. The difference is when you execute, you have to execute from the inside out. And that's why I always tell people don't start the marketing efforts until you've started to actually get traction internally on your culture. Because if you start the marketing efforts and you don't have the systems and the values and behaviors happening in your company, then it will become a hollow promise. And then you're in a hole that you have to dig out of. You've told people, here's who we are, and here's how we're going to treat you. It's not happening. So I turn away. And now you have to convince me to come back. So get the
Yeah, that
culture right,
disconnect
the
is going to be
systems
there.
right, and then market.
So you mentioned values there, Brad. What is the difference between culture and values?
Well, values, if you do it right, values should reflect the things that you need to live up to as a company in order for your brand promise to come true. Okay. But you can't see values in action. So I'll give you a good example of what I mean. I can't see integrity. I can see integrity in action, right? So what we always tell
Right.
people is your values need to be defined and you need to take it down to a behavioral approach. What does integrity look like if that's one of your values? What does um, leadership look like if that's one of your values? What does caring look like if that's one of your values? What does above and beyond look like if that's one of your values? Not just from a value standpoint, but from a behavior standpoint, because your behaviors are your culture in action. They're your values and your culture in action. That's what you're known for, right? So when you go eat at Chick-fil-A, as we discussed earlier, and you get that wonderful greeting when you walk through that door, that's a value and their culture in action that you feel as a customer,
That's
right?
what you can observe and actually
Correct.
experience.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
cool. Thank you. So, Brad, take us this morning on a cultivating culture journey. So you work with companies to develop this culture and help them, I guess, recognize what may be in their head or in their heart already, but they
Right.
need to get out and actually define it and systematize it. What does that look like?
Well, so I mean, we really want to take somebody's secret sauce and make it explicit is what we really want to do. And so the way we do that is, and we approach it very differently. Like I said, outside in, we first will work with you, and either you do it, or we'll help you do it, or we'll do it for you. But we will work with you to look at any customer data you have, surveys. We'll do focus groups. We'll really interview folks, and we're going to find out we're going to talk leadership too. We're going to find out who you are, why you exist, and whether you're actually delivering on that or not. We'll also find out when you are, what's causing you to deliver on that and what's causing you not to deliver on that. Then we're going to go inside and we're going to do the same thing with your employees and with your organization. We're looking internally and we're going to say what's working, what's not working in relationship to what we just found out, and we're going to take your strengths and we're going to say we need to leverage these things more. These and they become part of your values and behaviors that we help you define. And we typically define values and what we call winning behaviors. Um, we might take a weakness or two that you have to shore up and include it, because if that is integral to the success of your business, you're going to have to develop a competency on that. But we try and focus on a strengths-based focused culture, right? Once we've done that and we finished that off, we will actually help you do an audit of your company, and we'll look through every aspect of talent management, every aspect of your customer journey, and we'll look at all the systems and tools and things that you're using, and we're going to say, here's what's supporting your culture, and here's what's hindering or challenge you living up to your culture, getting in the way. And we'll ask you to think about making tweaks and changes to those. We have one company right now that's got a 2-year plan that they're actually making changes to their business over 2 years to make sure that every single thing in their business supports the culture and their ability to make the brand promise for their customers come true, right? So they're doing that. Once you've done that, now it's about building the culture. It's about it's about maintaining culture. I call it nurturing your culture. I think of culture as, James, I think of culture as a living, breathing entity. It is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. Too many companies, they put posters up and placards up and they think they're done. And
Hang it on the wall and that's good
oh,
enough.
no, in fact, it actually, it's one of the worst things you can do if you aren't putting real meat on the bone, because people see it, that your people see it as hollow. And you lose the souls of your employees when they see you doing something performative, right? They want to know it's real. So we will help you integrate this into your business. We will work with you on culture workouts that you can do during your meetings that take 5 to 15 minutes. We have conversation starters that are couple-minute conversations using a question. And we have over 52 questions that people can use um, to drive culture conversations. We actually have training that it comes in the form of train the trainer, in-house training, or e-learning around culture so that you can build culture champions, ambassadors, trainers, and you can truly make sure it gets shared throughout your entire organization, and everyone knows not only what your culture is, but why you have one, why it's important, how it helps your business, and how they can support it. And every single person in your company can play a role in its success. And then we have tools like um, 180 or 360-degree feedback tools on culture that give people an idea of how well am I living up and supporting the culture myself. We're doing that for a company right now where their senior leaders are all getting those, and they're getting feedback on how well they're supporting and living the culture. We work with companies on the character of culture in the beginning of an assignment where we have in fact, can I show you a tool? Not tool,
Please,
but can I show
yes.
you a
We'd love
model?
to see it.
All right,
You
I'll show
bet.
you a model. I have a slide I can share with you. So hang on one second. Let me figure out how to share the screen since we're doing this live, and I will. There we go. And let's share this and see if that gets put on there right. Do you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Every culture is going to be made up of these two axes that measure things, right? So the first one is, are you results oriented as a company, or are you passive as a company? Are you reactive as a company? The second one's going to be, are you people focused, or are you political or combative, right? And so we have people fill out assessments that answer questions that will tell you where you sit, right? And so if you have a group of people that are combative in nature and results oriented, you have what we call an aggressive culture. It fosters unhealthy competition, uncivil behavior, and people will undercut somebody else in order to get ahead, right? It's just not a good place to work, and you actually damage your business even though you're focused on results. The second one is more of a political or combative environment that, yes, that's passive or reactive, not very results oriented. And what you have there is you have avoidance. That's a group of people that want to feel safe. They want to avoid risk. They want to be on the good side. So they try and hide under the covers, right? They keep a low profile, and their whole point is to be very careful so they don't stand out and that they're okay. And unfortunately, when you're doing that, you're not taking care of business. Okay. Then when you have a passive environment that's people focused, that's what we call accommodating or harmonious. Everybody wants everybody to feel good, right? So we're overly polite. We're cautious about giving people feedback because we don't upset their feelings. And when we do that, it turns out it's a really nice place to work, but we don't achieve much. And it becomes problematic because we're not succeeding because everybody has to be happy. And so the last one is when you're results oriented and it's balanced with being people focused, right? When you're able to find that balance, we have what you call an assertive or healthy culture. And that's when people are confident, they're engaged, they're brave. They'll speak the truth, right? And it doesn't matter what the hierarchy looks like, they're going to speak the truth. And so you want that, right? I would give you a good example right now of a company that may have a long time ago been like this, but lost their way is Boeing. You see all the safety issues. You have airplane doors in people's yards, right? They're having all these problems. Why? Because they've lost the ability for people to be brave and confident, speak the truth, to be assertive, because they have chosen one of these other paths to go down in terms of their culture, consciously or unconsciously. So we give people an assessment that tells them where they sit as an organization and do they have different cultures in different parts of the organization? And we can give a post one after we've done the work to see the progress that they've made so they know that they're moving in the right direction.
That's a fun, that's a fun description of what to look for in the workplace, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask you this question, because you've talked a lot about established companies. How beneficial is it? How important is it to start culture early in the company? As a startup, we work with a lot of startups and a lot of founders, and it
Yeah.
sounds like maybe this is something that doesn't get thought of a lot at the beginning that should be.
Yeah, I actually think it's a mistake that it doesn't get thought of in the beginning. And I'll tell you why. It makes it founder dependent. And what that means, one of the biggest entrepreneurial problems you have is entrepreneurs have trouble scaling and that they become the bottleneck themselves. Or if they choose not to be the bottleneck, everything falls apart. And the reason is they're not building systems to support the business. And culture is one of those systems that supports the business. And we recently did a survey, and we found that, and I think you all were involved with a survey like this too, found that even early stage businesses that only have 50 people or less said that they are not taking care of their culture, they're not defining their culture, and that they need to, right? So what I would argue is if you're a one person shop, great. But the moment you're starting to add people and you have a team of folks, it is important that you define your culture, you systematize it, and you make it something that is your legacy, lasts beyond you, and it's not about you.
Cool. That's helpful. Get started early. It's easier when it comes from the beginning and doesn't try and get implemented in the middle.
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I will tell you this, even companies that have started it, where they mess up are things like, so we worked with one company that had about 15 different entities because they were doing mergers and acquisitions, and they had 15 different cultures. That's difficult to bring together into one. But if you don't, the friction of working with your customers becomes too hard and your business gets impacted by it. So, what I would say is, even if you are established and you think you have a culture, recognize that change, mergers, acquisitions,
Yeah.
all kinds of things will impact the health and well-being of your culture, and it needs to be readdressed. It is, again, it's not something you do and forget about. It's something that you have to continually revisit and live as a part of your daily life.
You've got mergers and acquisitions. You've got 15 different companies. And that's a very obvious need for adaptation with your culture. But
Right.
what if it's just your company and you're growing, you're scaling, times change,
Yes.
products change, customers change. How do you evolve your culture along with where you're at in your business?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple of things. Just because you're growing doesn't mean you should change your culture. Your culture, with all the change going on, your culture becomes kind of your stability and your glue that holds people together and holds things together. Um, However, you did mention something. If your customers change, if your brand promise is changing, right? If you're doing something uniquely different, or for a uniquely different group, then I think you should be revisiting your brand promise. You should be revisiting your culture. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the key. Paying attention to your business and how it's changing should impact your culture. Your culture needs to be what not only sets you apart, but what helps you deliver what you're supposed to deliver in your business, right? So I'll give you a good example. When I went and bought a long time ago, I should say a long time ago, a while back, I had a BMW. I bought a BMW, and when I went to the BMW dealer, they were really clear to me about the fact that they are not a luxury car company. They are a luxury sports car company, right? And that they are very clear that they have focused on that they're not like Toyota or Honda who have higher end brands like Lexus and Acura. They only focus on being a luxury sports car company. And they talked to me about their testing facility and how they test cars so they can actually handle the corners and all that kind of stuff. They went through and showed me those features when I looked at those cars. And when I went on the road for a test drive, they encouraged me to take a corner really, really fast to the point where I was nervous. I mean, I was scared. They're like, no, no, speed up and take the turn. And the whole point of it was they wanted to show you that the handling of that car was different than a Mercedes and other luxury type cars, that they had a unique place in the environment. And so everything they did, the way they talked to you, what the information they shared, even the test drives, all were built around that brand promise. And the car was built that way. And the way people talked to you was around that, right? So everything was built around that. If BMW were to change and say, we no longer want to be in the sports environment, we just want to be in the comfort, luxury environment, they have to change all those things that they do and everything they emphasize and the way they build their culture so that they can really deliver on a new brand promise. So what I would say is you're right. It needs to change, but be careful. Don't do it for the sake of changing it. Don't do it because you grew. Do it because your business has uniquely changed, who you serve is uniquely changing, and what you're delivering is uniquely changing. And so your culture must change to support that.
Very cool. I love that description, Brad, because it really brings to mind that some of the reasons we may think we need a culture shift are the very reasons we shouldn't shift our culture. That's what provides the stability and should stay right in place.
Absolutely. 100%. 100%.
Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about the day-to-day. How does a company day-to-day reinforce? It doesn't go on the wall. We talked about that. What does it look like? What does day-to-day reinforcement for culture look like?
Sure. I want to clarify one thing. I do think it could go on the wall. I just don't want it to go on the wall
And that'd be it.
without doing other things, right? Because if then
Yeah.
it's just a hollow picture, right? So I want to, there's nothing wrong with putting it on the wall. It's just placards and posters are not going to build your culture. That's the key. I would tell you a couple things. One is um, it can live daily in a lot of ways. I'll give you a couple examples. Your culture, the way you've defined it, should be part of any onboarding experience. And by the way, if you've got a cultural value, for instance, that celebrates something that's really important to you, maybe it is that we demonstrate that we care about each other. Well, from the very moment that person starts, shoot, even before that, when they're being recruited and they've been offered the job, before they even start, demonstrate that you care about them as a person by doing something special, you know? So for instance, maybe you send them some swag and tell them that you're welcoming them to the company before they start. You want them to fit in. Maybe you hook them up with a buddy that says, I want to make sure your first day is smooth. So it has to be built into all the things that you do. I also think that every time you have a meeting, there should be a cultural element. So for instance, every week I have a meeting with my team, and every week we have a cultural activity, right? We have a 5 minute, 10 minute activity. And I say activity, and I'll tell you why, that revisits an aspect of our culture and what's important to our business, and it's going to be important to our customers. And the reason we do that is because we want to live our culture every day, and it's a good reminder. But the other reason we do it is this: it allows for a two-way conversation. It allows for people to play with the idea of what something is. So I'll give you an example. One of our cultures is above and beyond, and it's about doing more for our clients than we need to or have to, right? And so by having conversations and activities about that, we do two things. We promote self-reflection, right? Am I really being above and beyond? Am I living that value? Two, we have people share their stories about living above and beyond. Now all of a sudden I've got new ways to be above and beyond. You also have people that share one, and somebody in the room might say, help me understand how that's above and beyond. And sometimes that causes people to go, you know what? I need to raise my game. And then you create this glue where everybody sees above and beyond from a similar state, similar vein, right? And that's powerful. So I think you have to put it into all your systems, your tools, your training, but you also have to visit it, talk about it, play with your culture on a regular basis. So I encourage people to have culture workouts and huddles. If you have shift meetings, do them daily. If you have weekly meetings, do one in each week. If you have monthly meetings, do them every month. Um, I think it's a powerful reminder of who you are, and it is important. One of my favorite clients I've ever had, just because they do beautiful work, is St. Jude, Alsec St. Jude, and they treat children with cancer. They save children with cancer. Well, the Alsec St. Jude is the fundraising side, and their senior leaders, James. You know how they start every single meeting? They start every single meeting with either a patient, and if they can't be there, a patient's family, to talk with them about the difference they've made in that family's life or in that child's life. And that is so powerful, and reminds them why they're there. And the reason they do that is they don't want to get caught up on the fact that we have to raise money. If it's all about the money, we forget about the mission. So they do that at the beginning of every meeting to remind them why they're there and why what they do is important. And they can never lose sight of supporting the kids and the families. That's a powerful runner, and they consciously choose to revisit it every time they meet. Those are the kinds of things that we have to do to drive it daily.
That's cool. Yeah, those are great suggestions. It's just, it really is, and it makes sense because the word culture, it becomes part of your daily life. It just permeates everything that you do.
Yeah, somebody asked a question about fixing cultures and how do you create the culture, the best culture that you can create. And so I was gonna share a slide that I think that talks to it a little bit, if that's okay.
Please. Yeah, I
All
was
right,
just,
good,
I saw that comment as well and was going to bring that up. So,
good, good. So let me share my screen again, and I will pull up that slide. And I just, to me, it is a great kind of picture of what we have to create if we want a culture to be successful and healthy, right? So this is the actual slide. Let's see if it pops up here for you.
yep.
Okay. All right. So now you see it. If you want a good culture and you want to fix it, there are three things I think you need to recognize and make sure are a part of your cultural fabric. The first one is that you're looking for shared norms and values, right? You have to create those. You need to have systems and tools that support them, but you can't do that until you know what they are, right? Um, that's the first thing. The second thing you need to be able to do is you need to value differences. Now, the reason I bring this up is because people say to me, how can you value differences and still have shared norms and values? And I have to give a real explicit answer to that. Um, let's just take, for instance, that if you had a value that your people all needed to speak the truth, right? Doesn't matter whether it's the CEO in the room or a colleague in the room or a subordinate in the room, everybody has to speak the truth. That's just one of our values, right? That's the shared value, that's a shared norm. Here's how you value differences. Extroverts can speak the truth typically in the moment because they think while they talk, right? And so you're in a meeting and they'll just spit things out. But somebody who has an introverted preference might need to process things. And so if I ask you a really tough question, maybe it's a controversial question or a political question, you may freeze up or not say anything in a meeting if you're introverted because you're trying to take the time to process it before you talk. So the way you value differences is I tell you all in advance, hey, it's now Wednesday. On Friday, we're going to have a meeting at 10 a.m. We're going to talk about this topic. I need each of you to bring your perspective, and I want you to be able to share with us your perspective on the day. Here's specifically what I want from you, and you spell it out, and you give everybody a chance to process it. So when you come into the meeting, they speak the truth. So now I have a shared value and norm, but I'm valuing differences. I'm processing that shared value and norm in a way that both extroverts and introverts can play, right? That's how you want to have a focus on shared norms by valuing differences. But the most important thing under all this is that it all has to be customer driven. We have to have the customer in mind when we're thinking about these shared values and norms and value and the differences, because it's the combination of those things that drive a healthy, successful culture, and we can't do without that. Now, there's one last factor I think that everybody needs to know, and that is culture can also be defined as the behaviors that you're willing to tolerate. Now, what do I mean by that?
Yeah,
I think that's really important. It means that your
dig
culture
deep into
cannot be
that.
optional, right? Joe, who's been there for 35 years, can't be allowed to get away with things that newer people can't. If you're a hospital and you have a brain surgeon and they're really important, they're getting news clips and people come to your hospital because that brain surgeon is there and they are harassing people. That can't be allowed just because they're the brain surgeon. Your top salesperson can't do whatever they want. I call this I call this the Matt Lauer rule. If you watched TV and you watched the Today Show, Matt Lauer almost destroyed the Today Show and the NBC morning programming because he was allowed to do whatever he wanted at NBC, even though other people couldn't. And when you do that, it takes a while, but one of two things happens. Either they create so much destruction and problems that it all falls apart, which is what happened at the Today Show, and it cost them an outrageous amount of money and time and energy to try and recreate what they had after he had to leave. Or other people look at that behavior and say, well, that's what they say our culture is. But if he can get away with that, maybe I can too. And you create more problems because other people have lowered the standard of the culture because you did in the first place. So once you decide on this, if this is truly going to succeed, make your business successful, set you apart, get you to truly live your brand promise, then it cannot be optional for anyone. And I think that's the other piece.
Very cool. Very cool. So, Brad, we've had a couple of other questions come in. If you want to just
Sure.
maybe continue on with some of these,
Sure.
how do you best synergize company culture and team culture? And then a second one, Christine asks a little bit more about with acquisitions and even global acquisitions, where do we focus in acclimating a new group and bringing them into the fold, so to speak?
All right, so let's take the first one. How do you synergize company culture with team culture? Um, I actually think you need to synergize team culture with the company culture. So I'm going to reverse the question. Company culture is first and foremost. We are part of one team, and we need to remember that we're part of one team, and we have to drive our company culture so that it is shared by everybody. Your team culture can be a little bit different, but it needs to be connected to and synergized with the company culture. And it should not be different enough that if I were to take somebody from another area in the company and plug them into your area, they couldn't fit in, and vice versa. Um, there are always going to be some level of subcultures, and I think that that's okay. The problem is when those subcultures are antithetical, right? They're antagonistic to the company culture. They have to be supportive of a company culture, much like a rolling balanced scorecard, right? So there's a company balanced scorecard, right? And it says, here's what we're trying to achieve. And if I run marketing, my goals are supposed to support that company set of goals. If I'm in accounting, they're supposed to support that company set of goals. If I'm in production, they're supposed to support the company goals. No different with the company culture. That's the culture. We need to live that culture, support that culture, and where we have subtle differences, it's because we are unique in what we're doing and we have to support what we're doing, but it still needs to support the broader view, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
that does. Yeah,
Um,
that's the umbrella, and everything needs to fit up underneath it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Christine, first of all, I'm going to say, can I say hi to somebody? I want to say hi to Christine Essery.
Please.
I don't know everybody on this call, but I recognized one name and she asked a question. So hi, Christine. It's great to see you here. I appreciate you being here. So you asked about greatest pitfalls and opportunities these companies, uh, those companies with multiple cultures through acquisitions and specifically with global acquisitions. Where should we focus within the stages of acclimating a new group? I think the best thing you can do is um, focus on who you serve. One of the biggest things that we did with the company that I just talked about, Christine, was we took the conversation away from you're trying to create the culture that you want because you want to win, right? It became like a little bit of a fight between the different companies. Um, and everybody had a vested interest in defending their stake in the ground. But when we took it away from that and we shared with them, here's what your customers are saying, here's what they want, here's when they're getting it, here's when they're not. We took it out of the context of who wins and who loses and brought it to the customer. Everybody knew that if we join hands and we focus on our customers together, we win. And if we don't, we lose, right? So I think the best way to acclimate people to a new culture and get them focused is to always tie it back to your business, your customers, and why it will make you successful. That's the biggest one of the biggest mistakes that companies make is they don't tie their culture directly to why they exist, their purpose, their brand promise, their customers, their members, their constituents, whatever you want to call them. But you're there for a reason. And if we get everybody to look at that common factor, who do we serve? And we build a culture around that to support that service to our customers. Then we take away the infighting, we take away all the other issues, and we're all working together towards a common goal that we all understand and agree upon. I think that's the most powerful thing we can do.
So it really kind of comes back to being others focused,
Yes.
and keeping that focus exterior, and that brings us all together.
Now, that doesn't mean we're not creating a good environment for employees. We're still doing that.
Right.
We are starting
Yeah.
from the outside and working in. And so they're involved, and it is about creating an environment that is great for them to work in and allows them to service the customer better. So it does include the employees, but it starts with your customer's mind. And I think that you used a word that's really important. It's about removing the self-interest, not being self-oriented, about believing in something bigger than ourselves. And most of the time, we argue about culture from a self-interested standpoint. I don't want that. I don't like that. This is what I want. This is what we did at this company, right? And those are all ego-driven conversations that remove us from why we're really there. So I hope that helped answer your question, and I hope I understood it well, Christine. But that would be my answer based on what I saw. And by the way, if I didn't answer your question, you are more than welcome to contact me afterwards, and I will answer it based on having a better understanding and being able to talk with you. So,
Brad, one of the things that came to my mind as you were giving that answer is how do we evaluate culture day to day? So I like the huddles and the questions that get us thinking about it. As a senior leader or as an individual within the company, how do we know how we're doing? How do you evaluate?
sure. So I'll go back to a whole concept of things. I'll show you. We have a cultivating culture process where we do all the things that we just talked about, that we discussed, you and I. We have the trainer and everything in there. It's a great process. And by the way, I think it blows away anything that's out there. I know a lot of people have used things like Sendelani, et cetera. This is built for today's workforce, and it is much more comprehensive and stronger. I'd encourage anybody who's using a cultural program that's not giving them the kind of traction they need or want, or has gotten a little tired, come see us and talk to us. But I'm going to answer your question. I'm actually going to show people what they can do that I think is really, really cool. And so let me share my screen again. And I'm going to think this is it. Hopefully I'm at the right screen. So I am at the right screen. Fantastic. So we actually partnered with SourceScribe, with SOAR, right? And we have created a version of a SourceScribe that is culture focused. Now I'm going to share with you ours, but what I love about the tool is it records the meeting. It gives you a transcript of the meeting. You can go to anywhere in that recording and transcript and see what was being talked about. And so you have the tool that everybody else gives you. You've got lots of those out there. What's different about this is, besides the video, the notes, the transcript, there are insights that you can get. And so I'll give you a good example of what we mean. Depending on what your shared norms and values are, it's going to give you. We got 3 different versions here that we have, but we will actually take your shared norms, your values, as well as our definition of what a successful, healthy culture looks like, and we have after every meeting you have, whether it's Zoom, Teams, or anybody else, you'll get feedback. And that feedback will tell you how you're doing in the meeting related to your culture, your values, your behaviors, and creating a culture where both the organization and the individual thrive. It's going to give you a grade, and then it's going to give you feedback on what you did well and what you could do differently or better. So after every single virtual or hybrid meeting you have, you're actually getting coaching from an AI that has watched your meeting and is sharing with you insights about your own cultural definitions and how well you're living up to them. That's really powerful. And it continues forever as long as you keep that going. So to me, I think that's a powerful tool that we have that other people aren't offering, as well as things like the assessments I shared about with you before and other factors. But I would tell you this, tie it into everything you do, tie it into your succession planning. I believe that succession planning typically looks at performance of your individuals, but you should actually be using a model. We have a model that helps people look at performance and and the way they live and support the culture. And it's the combination of those two things that should determine whether someone should be promoted, coached, let go, right? And we if we tie things like culture into succession planning and promotions, we're going to do a much better job for our organizations than if we don't. So we have a whole process for that for companies as well. So
Well, and it ties back to the graphic that you showed us earlier, where if you're just results oriented and not enough people, you can be a real high performer focused on results, but that doesn't establish perhaps the culture that you're looking for. So
exactly. And how many times have
key
we seen people
point.
promoted who are results oriented at the expense of their people? You know, it happens way too often, unfortunately.
It
So
does. It does.
yeah.
So we've got just a few minutes left, Brad. I'm curious, how do you see culture evolving for the future? What's going to happen in the future, and where does culture? I liked your answer earlier. Maybe culture doesn't need to shift, but what needs to happen for the future?
Well, I mean, I think culture becomes more important in the future. I think it becomes the biggest differentiator. I think the world is if I'm working today, if I graduate from college today, I'm probably going to work for 50 to 60 years, and my skill set will start to go stale between 2 and 5 years. Change is inevitable. And what you're seeing with that is you're seeing a large increase on things like incivility at work, prescription drugs being skyrocketing in terms of sleep needs and in terms of anxiety. And you're seeing all these kinds of breakdowns because we're struggling with change. And it's affecting performance in workplaces. So the reality is the only way to combat that internally in your four walls is to create a culture that gives stability and glue to people and makes their lives easier, allows them to manage their lives better, right? So your culture needs to allow for a couple things. One, it needs to be healthy. Two, it needs to allow for a workplace life and a personal life. Three, it needs to provide purpose and meaning in people's work. And then four, it needs to make sure that people are faster, better, and stronger today than they were yesterday. So I think culture is going to take more of a paramount um, view of the world, right? And the way we look at culture, in terms of the way I just described, is going to become more important, and it's going to differentiate companies. Here's the sad part about it. We've been doing some research, and we found out that 47% of HR leaders admit they don't know how to drive cultural change to be successful. And only 35% of employees say they work in a culture that allows them both themselves and the organization to thrive. We have one research project that's showing it's now down to 24%. That's pretty crazy. And so it becomes more important. It's going to differentiate companies, but the problem is too many companies are struggling with it, and they need to take more of a stance and make that happen if they're going to leverage their culture. And by the way, there's a study out that is a great study that actually looks at um, if culture would improve the value of an organization. 91% of executives said that culture would improve the value of their organization, and and 30% of the most admired companies executives attribute at least 30% of their company's market value to customers. So culture is a C-suite issue. It needs to be addressed. And it even goes further, James. If you look at the people that rate their culture high, meaning they think they have a great culture or a good culture versus those that think they have a terrible or poor culture, there is a 790% difference in the satisfaction at work and a 91% difference. They're 91% less likely, if they view the culture positively, to actively look for a job within the next 6 months. 83% less likely to actively look for a job at all, and 91% less likely to dread going to work. So you put all that together, market valuation, C-suite concern, and the impact it's having on employees, this isn't going away. It's only becoming more important. James asked me if I could provide an offer to companies out there. We have that character of culture model that I showed you earlier. We actually have an assessment around that. Anybody that's interested, I'm happy to offer that assessment for up to 50 people. And we will run a report and we'll go over it with you so that you can learn a little bit about your culture. And if there are multiple cultures, one culture, if it's positive, if it's working for you or not, I'm happy to make that offer to you. You can reach me at bfederman@performancepointllc.com. You can reach me on LinkedIn, or if you want, you can call me at 901-291-1547. 3 different ways to get in touch with me. And I just want to thank you for your time.
Brad, thank you so much. Appreciate your time here this afternoon, and please, keep us in. We'll stay in touch with you, and we'll enjoy watching what's happening with Performance Point and with company cultures.
Sounds good. Sounds good. My pleasure. Thank you for having me, James.
So thanks, everyone. Appreciate your attendance, and Brad, again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.